This is the installation instruction for my 4-function wireless remote control for Honda's new fuel-injected EU7000iS. Okay, the very first step is going to be to remove the handlebars. You'll notice that I've got it set up on a bench and I don't have the wheels installed yet. That's because the installation of the wheels is covered in the owner's manual and so forth. But when you get ready to install the wireless remote control, I like the handlebars extended up. It's just a lot easier to me. With the handlebars in the up position, remove the 2 attaching bolts. You notice that these bolts are special. I've got an 8mm thread and a shoulder, and then a wave washer that acts like a spring that keeps tension against the handlebars. There's one on each side. When you get the 2 bolts out, push down on the thumb levers and just lift the handlebars out. Next, you'll see 2, let me pull the battery box off and show you that first. This door simply reveals the battery box, and you'll notice that when you get the battery box cover open, you've got the data terminal, the fuse box, and the remote control plug accessible to you. The next step is there are 2 acorn nuts at the bottom of the front cover. And they're just 6mm acorn nuts. Then at the top, there are shoulder bolts, one on each side with a 6mm threaded section. Now when we pull this cover off, you'll notice there's a rubber gasket that goes around the inside here. That may drop out of the way, and then there's a foam gasket that goes between the cover and the metal frame, and that may also drop out of the way. Here is the rubber gasket that I was talking about, and that simply goes up against the control panel. And then there's a foam gasket in a groove right here that goes all the way around the cover. There are 2 metal inserts here. Let me see if I can get one out to show you. Right here, spacers that go through the bottom of the cover. They will occasionally drop out of place. If they do, put them back into place. Set the cover to the side temporarily. Now, to get the control panel off, the first step is to remove the foam that they've got around the mount brackets for the handlebars. And yes, the foam is in this rough a shape. I'm not sure why they put it there. Things like that are usually because there's a slight buzzing sound and they just want to dampen the buzzing sound. So it could be that without this foam that the handlebars buzz ever so slightly. This is a particularly quiet generator, so they may want to eliminate that. The brackets for the handlebars are held in place with a 12mm nut, top and bottom. So you'll remove both of the 12mm nuts to get each bracket off. Here's the bracket, and they are different. There is a left and a right. The nuts are the same. Take that phone call. Okay, I just had to take that phone call real quick. And we'll take off the bottom nut. And like I said, stack the brackets so that you know which one was left and which one was right. Then you'll see that there are 3 nuts that hold the control panel on. 10mm nut right here. 10mm nut right at the bottom, between this brace and this clamp. And then over here on this side, this nut has a plastic cap over it. I don't know if the LED flashlight is washing the color out or not. But now you can see it. Simply pull this cover off, and all it does is keeps the wires from rubbing against the nut and rubbing through the insulation. And you'll see it's just a simple plastic cap that pushes in place. That's one thing I noticed when we put the LED lighting in the shop area here. It has a tendency to wash the color out of some videos. Okay, so we remove the control panel by taking these 3 nuts out. And then I use a bungee cord. You can use whatever you choose, but I like to support the control panel when I've got it slid out. So what I'm going to do is just lift up gently and slide the control panel out and just let it hang on the bungee. Drop the lid to my fuse box. Okay. Now if you look in here, let me see if I can get this to lay a little bit flatter. You'll notice right at the bottom, in this area here, there's an open space. And that's where we're going to mount the radio itself. It's right in this area. The radio is mounted with a piece of Velcro. You'll have one piece of Velcro is attached to the radio module. I temporarily misplaced my Velcro strip. Both strips of Velcro come in the kit, incidentally. So the coarse Velcro strip, peel the back off of it. And the glue that they use is particularly aggressive. So make certain that you've got it in the right place before you stick it down. And it's not something where it has to be absolutely dead on for alignment and aesthetically pleasing, because nobody ever sees this. So there the Velcro piece is now in place. And what we'll do is we'll stick the radio module to that Velcro. This is the radio module. And we're going to lay it in so that it sticks like this to the back. The antenna will be pointing out this direction. The antenna has a magnetic base on it, so I'm temporarily going to stick it to this cover. I'm going to hold the relay and the radio in one hand, and the main remote plug harness is going to fit under the main harness of the radio. And just make sure that whenever you snap the radio in place, I try to bias it as far this direction as you can, as far away from the outlets. It's not really that difficult to see where you're putting it. It's just difficult for the camera to see. And once I get my hands out of the way, it'll be a lot easier. You'll notice that the tie clip pokes through the metal housing, so there needs to be a gap at the bottom of the radio module so that it will stick firmly against the Velcro. Okay, now as you know, my radio kit will turn on and off one of the outlets by remote control. Okay, my kit uses a relay which allows you to turn on and off one of the outlets. Which outlets you choose is not really important. You can go with either the top or the bottom. I usually go with the bottom outlet. What you'll do is there is a wire that goes from the circuit breaker to powering the bottom outlet. Now, it's not important to remove the outlet to install it. It can be done without it. But in order to allow you to see it clearly, I'm going to remove the outlet, which is done by removing the two 8mm nuts, one at the top and one at the bottom of the outlet. And then there's a blue wire, as I stated earlier, and it goes onto the bottom screw. The red wire goes on the top screw, blue wire goes on the bottom screw. So we'll loosen up that screw, undo one end of the blue wire, squeeze this little tab. This tab right here, if you squeeze on it, it releases and allows this terminal to be unplugged from the relay, or excuse me, from the circuit breaker. You'll set that aside momentarily. Now, the outlet, what I do is I feed, or excuse me, the relay, I feed the wires from the relay under the blue wire that goes to the 30 amp 120 volt outlet. You'll notice the blue wire has an open ring terminal like one end of the stock blue wire. The red wire has a spade connector like the opposite end of the stock blue wire. So we'll put the ring terminal, let me get this phone for a minute. Okay, now I'm just going to tighten down the screw to the blue wire. and fit the outlet back down into place. Okay. I'm just taking the antenna wire, feeding it to where I can keep it out of the way. Now take the red wire from my relay and plug that onto the back of the circuit breaker. You'll notice the relay has enough wire that it can be tucked just about anywhere. And just tuck it down and out of the way. Actually, what I'm going to do is, once we get the eco mode, is I will put it right here and we'll tie wrap it in place. But I want to do the eco mode first because the wires to eco mode are underneath that. The eco control on my radio is controlled by the two yellow wires. Just take them and route them from the radio over to the area behind the eco mode switch. I don't know if you can see this clearly or not, but I just routed the yellow wires underneath the mother harness and right up here. Now the eco mode switch is right here on the top in the front of the generator. You have two wires going to the back of it. Just wiggle either one of the wires loose. It does not matter which one. This one happens to be right behind the main harness. And just wiggle the wire loose in such a way that you don't damage the switch. Some of them are a little tough to get loose. If you feel the switch starting to come apart, stop before it totally flies apart in your hands. Okay, so now I have the wire unplugged from the back of the eco mode switch. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and pull that switch all the way out just to demonstrate how it goes together if you do have a problem. Okay, so I've unplugged both the wires from it right now. Can you see the switch itself? It's this black device right down here. And there's a tab on each end of it that you squeeze in on the tab and rock it out. You'll notice that there are two terminals on the back of the switch. The switch goes in this way. So you've got one terminal that's in the center, the other terminal that's to your right as you're facing the generator. Let me show you how these switches come apart, just in case it comes apart when you're pulling the wiring harness off the back of the switch. I've had these switches pop apart on me in the past, and of course this one is glued together rather nicely, but we'll get it apart anyway just to show you how they work. Okay. You'll notice the little red dot is the end of the bar that rocks back and forth. And that red dot is spring-loaded, so it pushes in. This is the contactor, and you'll notice it's bowed ever so slightly. Now one side of the contactor has a large brass button on it. The other side has just a very small brass button. So place the contactor inside the switch. Easier said than done. And this will be with the curve facing up, so that the large sized brass piece is facing up as well. I have to set it in upside down. Okay, what I'm going to do, place the contactor right here so you can see it now, and it's bowed upward. Then take the switch, and you'll notice that there's a box area. That box area faces to this direction, and then snap it together like this, and these side snaps will catch in place, and you'll actually hear them audibly click into place. Okay, so if when you're unplugging the wire from the back of this, if you do run into a problem, now you know how to put it together. It is very, very slight chance that you'll actually run into that issue. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to show you how to resolve it if that happens to you. Incidentally, to get the switch out, what I did was I just pushed in on these two pieces on the side. And to put the switch back in place, you simply slide it back up in there, and it snaps into place. So now we have two wires that used to go to the eco switch. And like I said, that's just an on-off switch, so it really doesn't matter which one goes where. So we're going to go ahead and cut the end off of one of them. And I'm going to cut the end off of the wire with the white tracer. Then I'm going to strip the insulation off of that wire. And connect that to the yellow wire from my radio. And then tug on it just a little bit to make sure we did it good. Okay, so now you have two spade connectors again. One goes on one of the terminals, the other one goes on the other terminal. Since the stock Honda wire is the shortest, we'll put that to the terminal that it's the closest to. And the wire that comes with my kit, there's plenty of length to it to allow you room to work. So we'll put that on the one that's the farthest away. Okay. Now we'll take the relay, take one of the tie wraps that was included in the kit. I'm just going to zip tie the relay to this group of wires. Okay. Now we'll take the antenna, undo the bread tie. It's wrapped around it. You'll have a 50-inch piece of wire. Do not cut this wire under any circumstances. It is a coax wire. I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to feed it underneath the mother harness. Bring it right out this way and stick it to the top of the generator again. So that now, if you look, your antenna routes right up over the top of the radio. And I'm going to take another tie wrap included in the kit and just zip tie these wires to the mother harness. That'll keep them in place nicely. I do want to try and keep the antenna wire from actually touching the outlet or one of the high tension wires, because that can reduce the range of the radio in theory. So rather than doing a lot of unnecessary work, find out if the theory is true. Let's just assume that it is true and be a little bit defensive. This is the plug for the remote control harness, and I'm just routing it out through here temporarily. Just letting it hang down here. The antenna wire can run right straight across. And incidentally, the antenna itself unscrews from the base. It'll be a little bit easier to work with. And we've now fed it through this large hole here, where it'll come outside the control box. It needs to come outside the control box because the control box itself is a Faraday cage, which is specifically stops radio frequency transmission. So you don't want the antenna mounted inside a Faraday cage. It won't work. And now we get to the fun part. What I'm going to do, the remote control harness from Honda has this black cover over it. Just unsnap that black cover off and then squeeze this pin so that this plug will unplug. And you notice it's got that little loop wire. And you can set these both out of the way temporarily. That's probably as good a place to take a break as any. Incidentally, if you did wind up taking this eco mode switch out to repair it or for whatever reason, and when you get it all back together and the on and off are backwards, in other words, when you've got the switch in the off position, it's actually in eco mode, and when you've got it in the on position, it's actually in standard mode, that means you installed the switch upside down. You have two choices. You can either get used to it being backwards or take the switch back out and flip it around, put it in right side up. Incidentally, remember there was one pin dead in the center of the switch. The other pin should go to this side. If you got one pin in the center and the second pin to this side, it's in upside down. And it occurs to me, after having shown you how to repair the switch, that if the switch did come apart, you could simply go down to the local Honda shop and just get another new switch. Either that, or the best case scenario is be very careful as you pull them apart. It's been years since I've had one come apart on me. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to show you how to deal with that. Okay, now we've got everything that's going to be involved in the back assembled the way it needs to be. So now we're going to go down here and we're going to work with the remote control harness and the fuse block. And the reason I need to work with the fuse block is I want it set up to where my radio can control the fuel injection computer. Because the fuel injection computer in standby mode pulls a tremendous amount of power compared to this little battery. And in order to do this, let me show you real quickly. The fuse block is this light washing the color out. You'll see in the fuse block, if you look up at it, there's a little plastic tab right here that you can push down on. I'll let you hold the flashlight so you can see what the camera actually sees. But you would push down on this like this. So you push down on it and just push back on the fuse block so that the fuse block will now come loose so that you can work with it. Then go to the inside of the radio case up in here and you'll see where the wireless remote control plug, can you see this plug here? This piece of plastic. There are two tabs, and I'm going to squeeze in on them so that we can remove the remote control plug. And if you can't see them clearly now, I'll show them to you once we get it apart so that you can see them clearly. Okay. So we've got that out of the way. Let me put the control panel up into place loosely so that we can do the rest of the work that we need to do. And I'm just going to put one of the 6mm loop or nuts loose on each side while we do this. Okay, here's the harness that comes out of the radio. You'll remember that. Now this is the wireless harness that's from Honda. And it is plugged into a round hole in the bottom of the control panel. And you'll see that there are two tabs right here. And what you do is simply squeeze those two tabs together. You can either reach in with a pair of needle nose pliers, squeeze them together, and push it down. Or what I did is I took a screwdriver and I pushed in on one tab and I rocked it a little bit, and then I pushed in on the other tab and rocked it the rest of the way down so that this would come out. And of course, on the fuse holder, what I did was I pushed down on this center tab and slid the whole thing backwards. So now we get to the fun part. There's two fuses. There's a 15 amp and a 3 amp. Let's go ahead and pull the fuses out for now. And then on the 15 amp fuse, try to get us just enough room to see it. You'll see on the 15 amp fuse there are two large wires, and on the 3 amp fuse there are two small wires. We're going to take the fused side of the 15 amp, which is going to be green with the orange tracer. So we're going to remove this fuse pin from the back of the fuse holder so we can tie into it. If you look, I don't know if you can see with the camera, in two of the unused fuse places, there are little tabs right down here, and you see that they're spring bound. You can take a terminal tool like this or a real small screwdriver like this and fold. In fact, I'll use the screwdriver that way just to show that it can be done. And I want to remove the green with the orange tracer. So I'm going to fold that tab down just a little bit so that that wire now comes out. And now I can work with it. And that is the fuse side. The power comes in on the black with the yellow, goes through the fuse, and returns on the green with an orange tracer. My kit comes with two wires with 090 disconnects on one end. You'll see that one of the wires is slightly larger diameter than the other, and that would be the pink one. So we're going to take the pink wire and strip about 8 millimeters of insulation off the end of it. You'll notice that there is a hole drilled in the fitting that goes into the fuse holder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the wire through that hole. Easier said than done. And just let it fold out of the way just like that for a moment. Let me take this phone call. Okay, I just had to take care of that phone call. What we're going to do is we're going to solder this wire into this connector just to make sure it doesn't come loose. Let me get this phone too. Okay, so now that we've got our lead soldered into the side of this, we're going to take and put this right back in the way it came out. And remember that this side faced the center. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in, and then I'll let you zoom in on it and see exactly what I meant by that statement. Let me get the wire sitting correctly. Okay. Picture's worth 1,000 words. If you can see what I meant by that now. It's right back in the way it used to be. Okay, now we're going to go to the fused side, because what it does is power goes in through this one, through the 15 amp fuse, and back out through here. Power goes into the 3 amp fuse through this, goes across and comes back out through here. So now we're going to remove this brown with a yellow tracer, and it removes the same way. Just push that little tab over to release it. And now we've got it out. Same procedure on it. Only it will use the slightly smaller diameter red wire as opposed to the heavy diameter pink. And if you need a memory aid on that, of course the smaller diameter wire goes to the 3 amp fuse and the heavier diameter wire goes to the 15 amp fuse. And we're going to run this the same way. I'm going to feed the wire through that small hole. We're going to push it down where it sits nice and flush there. Put some tension on that wire. And then I'll solder it in place. Now we're going to let it cool cool down just for a minute before we go grabbing it, giving ourselves third-degree burns. And this is the same situation here. We'll rotate it, push it in. And we want it to go back into the slot the same way it came out, but simply with the addition of another wire. And these extra fittings that we're putting in here simply allow me to take a fused 12-volt signal lead for switching so I can turn the fuel injection computer on and off, because after testing I discovered that Honda's fuel injection computer draws a tremendous amount of power in standby mode. And the neat thing about remote controls is that you should be able to use them in standby mode, so this way we can control this generator's voracious appetite for power. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the fuse box cover, or fuse box, slide it up into the brackets. As you can see, it slides up into the brackets here, and then we're just going to pull it towards us, and you'll see that this little tab clicks into place right there. And now the fuse box is back in the stock position. And now we'll take our two fuse. Okay, the fuse to the far left, or excuse me, the slot to the far left is the 15 amp fuse. The slot Next to it is the 3 amp. I recommend you leave these fuses out, because if you have the fuses in, these leads are hot, and if you inadvertently touch it to the ground terminal of the battery, excuse me, the pink lead is hot. The red one's not hot because the key's off. But if you inadvertently touch this to the ground terminal of the battery or touch it to the chassis of the generator, you'll blow the fuses. So I recommend you leave the fuses out until you get this next step done. So we've got the fuse holder plugged in, and this is the remote control plug. You'll notice that there are 3 empty slots. There's one in the top row, and we will not be using that one at all. There are 2 in the bottom row, and I'm going to refer to the attaching pin as the top. This down here would be the bottom. So this slot here I'm going to refer to as the second one from the left on the bottom row. And that's where the larger wire, or pink in color, goes to. And on the generator radio module, it'll plug into that eventually. So if you look at this, you'll see this is the way that it needs to plug in, because there's a slot right here where a locking tab engages. If you put it in upside down, there is no slot or locking tab. So what we're going to do is take this wire and bend this out of the way and just push this in, and you'll hear an audible click when it's locked in. So now the second one from the left, bottom row, has a wire in it. Now we will do the 3 amp lead, and the same rules apply. Make sure that the open window faces up, smooth side down, and we're going to put it in the bottom row, extreme left. And again, you feel an audible click when it goes into place. Now, if you're feeling brave, you could push that up into place and you'd be good to go. What I'm going to do is a quick test on it before we go and put everything together. In order to test it, we need to ground the control box. So I'm just going to hook onto this terminal and hook the other end to one of the threaded studs. So this is solidly connected to the frame of the generator. And now I'm going to take 15 amp fuse and put it into the AND slot, and the 3 amp fuse, and put it into this second slot over. Then the harness from my radio, we want to make sure that it's not touching anything or shorting out against anything. Make sure it's got plenty of play in it. We're going to loop it around and plug it into, goes in like this. It'll only go one way, so you're good there. And we're going to plug it into this. And I'm not snapping this up into place yet, because we want to make sure that we got everything correct. So now, in theory, everything should work. So we'll take the key, and if you've got one of these and you've played with it, you already know that the starting procedure is to turn the key to the on position, at which point the fuel injection computer comes on, and then you would hit the start button. Being that we're in a small room, I'm going to hit the start button to see if something happens, and then I'll shut the key off instantly so it doesn't go starting up on us, because we don't really need it to start. Okay. So now we have it hooked up to where it works, and we've seen that it works in stock. So now, to test the radio, I'm going to turn the key back to the on position, and because I've determined in testing that Honda's fuel injection computer, along with the LED pack and so on, pulls 140 milliamps standby current, I wanted to be able to turn that on and off so that it'll extend the standby. So Button number 2 shuts off Honda's fuel injection computer. So if you wanted to run it on remote control, let me go ahead and shut everything down again. Incidentally, it sets everything back to the stock position. If you shut the key to the off and turn it back on, everything's in default position again. So now if I wanted to start it by remote control, I would hit either this start button here or button 1 on my remote control. And I'm going to hit button 1 just for a moment, and if it starts to crank, then I'll shut this off again because I don't want to start it. There's no point in it. Ooh, it wants to run. Okay, so now we have validated that indeed the radio does work. You can breathe a sigh of relief and get yourself a glass of iced tea or whatever. So now what I'm going to do, turn the key to the off position, pull it out, pull my little jumper leads off and out of the way. I'm going to pull the nuts off of either side and take one good look back there now and make sure that all the wires are where they need to be. Okay, can you see with the camera? Okay. So now we're gently going to push the remote control panel back up into place. I just put the two 6mm nuts on each end. As you remember, we have a third 6mm nut. Goes right down here on the bottom. We shine our flashlights back down there and make sure that we didn't pinch any wires anywhere. Okay. These are my radio wires. They're nicely out of the way. Okay, at this point we can go ahead and snap the remote control plug. You can see the hole that it goes up into. We're going to push this in here and then slide this straight up, and it engages into the top of this. I am going to go ahead and take the tie wrap and tie wrap this harness to the negative battery terminal wire. That way all the wires stay in a nice clean loop. Okay. So now if you played with one of these, you notice that it doesn't quite work like any of the other Honda generators. And that's because it is fuel injected, and Honda wanted to make things difficult on us. But now, instead of having a key switch that you just turn all the way over and it starts, you have a master power switch. And then you have a start button. And when you hit the start button, you will hear the fuel injection pump kick on for about 2 seconds. And then it'll engage the starter motor and it'll start the thing up. If you wanted to switch it into economy mode, you would use this switch here. And if you wanted to shut off power to one of these outlets by the stock Honda method, you'd have to simply unplug it. And now, with my remote control, the procedure is actually quite similar. In order to arm the system, you turn the key on. And now everything's armed. But if you don't want to run the generator yet, but you want to conserve battery life, you would hit button number 2. And you'll notice that shuts off the fuel injection computer. So now the only thing that is live is my radio. And it only pulls about 25 milliamps, which with this battery you'll have a couple of days of standby power, as long as you have disarmed the stock fuel injection computer. If you wanted to start the generator and you forgot that it was unarmed, you hit button number 1, nothing happens. No big deal. So if you hit button number 1 a few times and nothing happens, that's a good memory aid. You then know to hit button number 2 to arm the system. Now the fuel injection computer is live. And then hit button number 1. And I'm going to go ahead and shut it off as soon as it starts to crank, because I don't want to gas us out of here. So everything works. We'll go ahead and start putting the cabinetry back together. Okay, so now that we've tested the system, we can go ahead and get ready to put the cabinetry back together. First step is to put the brackets for the handlebars in place. And remember, there is a left and a right. This one would be the right. A bit of a hurry. This panel would be the left one. Let me go ahead and take that phone call. Okay, now we're going to put these mutilated sections of foam back in place. Tuck them down in there nicely. Okay. Then I'll take the lid for the fuse box, snap it into place. This blue wire, as you remember, used to connect this circuit breaker to this outlet. You'll no longer be using that. And this is the original plug that was snapped into the remote control harness, and you won't be using that now. So you can set both of those aside. Let's not forget to put the plastic cover. You'll notice that this cover has a hex cut into it, and that goes over this 6mm nut just to keep it from rubbing through the wires. take the antenna, and that will feed through the battery door. We'll make sure that all the rubber gaskets are in place. None of them is damaged. Feed the antenna wire through the battery door. We want to make sure that we don't inadvertently pinch the antenna wire as we're putting this together. Okay. Take our 2 acorn nuts. Screw them onto the bottom. Our 2 shoulder bolts with 6mm threaded areas go into each side, and you will have to push on the plastic cover what you're doing is compressing all that foam that they shoved in there. Take the handlebars and just hang them by the latch mechanism. We get both sides started before we go sparking down. Okay. Okay, those go up nicely. The antenna, like I stated earlier, has a magnetic base on it. So you can stick it on the metal gas cap or on the metal EFI plate or somewhere on the top of the generator to get the greatest range. Route the antenna wire, and you'll notice that the battery door has a tab that cuts out for the use of the Honda stock wired remote control. It would go on here, and a wired remote control cable would plug right through there. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out, and the antenna wire will now feed through that slot. trim the plastic up so it'll look nicer. Okay. With that, our install is complete. Just make sure that you don't step on the antenna wire or whatever. If you move the antenna to the back corner of the fuel tank, the antenna wire is stretched fairly snug, so it won't get down and get tangled around your feet. Or if you wanted to, loop it around the fuel cap, and it keeps it fairly snug. And that way this antenna wire doesn't fall down and get caught on the ground or get dragged around or something like that, because you do not want to risk tearing that. And that should just about do it.